12 years trapped on a couch. The cushions are indented, crumpled, and dark, like the folds of ancient, forgotten fabric. I trace my fingers along the seams, feeling the grit of dust beneath my nails. 12 years is a long time to sink into a place, long enough for the world outside to become a myth, for shadows to become companions. The air smells of stale sweat and a faint, sickly sweet rot that I can never quite place. My nostrils flare, pulling in the scent as if it were an old friend. The peeling wallpaper around me tells tales of faded colors, once bright, now muted and cracked, just like my memories. My face is a mosaic of despair and defiance, marred by the faint outlines of tears that were shed so many years ago. I remember the clawing touch of the plastic that wrapped around me, each day growing tighter, strangling my freedom, my hope. The plush fabric of the couch has become a second skin, its embrace both familiar and monstrous. My body has become a map, and the channels of dust and grime are the lines, gnawing, leading me to the edges of my bodily and spiritual capabilities. How far can I go? The faint echo of distant footsteps reaches me, muffled and elusive. I hadn't heard them in so long that I almost didn't recognize them. They are like whispers in a language I once knew but now barely understand. My heart quickens, a solitary drumbeat in a sea of silence. I try to move, but my limbs feel heavy like weights pulling me back into the abyss of stillness. My muscles ache, sore and unused as if the movement itself is an act of rebellion. The television is my only window to the outside world. The screen flickers, its light dancing erratically, casting shadows that writhe and twist, mocking me. All the pretty girls, all the grown women, all the handsome boys and men, all the crucial milestones that evaporated like fog from my life, no going back. News reports, melodramatic, inform me of stories I no longer relate to. They are a world apart, a reminder of the cruelty of losing my life and yet a sedating sleeping pill. It's like only I am real and they are a childhood cartoon playing in the background while I drift away in my sleep, knowing I am real. Then it happens, the shattering of routine, a clang of metal against metal. The front door bursts open, and for a moment, a gust of fresh air invades the stale confines of my prison. The sounds of bustling activity, voices sharp and authoritative, pierce through the oppressive silence. I try to call out, but my voice is a raspy whisper, choked by 12 years in the same spot on the same couch. Is she in here? The voice is stern, decisive. I can almost see the figure at the door, outlined by the light that spills in like liquid gold. At this moment, I know that I am no longer allowed to be the same person, and my existence as I know it is threatened. There is no way back. My earliest memories are tinted with a soft, hazy light, like looking through fog glass. My parents, Tom and Lisa, were a couple wrapped in quiet despair, their days punctuated by the low murmur of arguments, their nights stretching long in silence. They had dreams once, like everyone does, but those dreams wore thin and unraveled as time wore on. I was their final attempt at happiness, the last stitch in a frayed fabric. It was in my 10th year that the couch became a fixture in our home. They called it the comfort chair, a name steeped in ironic cruelty. I remember the day it arrived. Tom, with his usual air of exasperated resignation, carried it into the living room. Lisa, with her eyes glazed over from the countless disappointments, barely registered its arrival. I was left to examine it, a monstrous, imposing thing, its fabric dark and velvety, comforting. In the beginning, it was simple. I was grounded for petty offenses and sent to the couch as a punishment. I hated it but found security in the routine. My world shrank to the size of this cushioned prison. Over time, the couch became more than a punishment. It was an escape from the growing tension in our household. I would sink into its folds, burying myself in its depths, where my world was muffled and distorted, and yet it was also fantastical, like clouds beaming from ideas and imagination, shape-shifting, pouring with relief, ever-changing in their color palette as the years progressed. The reasons for my confinement changed. They became less about punishment and more about convenience. I was out of sight, out of mind, an afterthought in their lives. The couch was no longer just a chair, it was my existence, my cell, my world. My parents rarely spoke to me, their conversations conducted with the air of people who had forgotten how to communicate with each other, let alone with their daughter. The process was gradual, an erosion rather than a violent shift. I grew accustomed to the lack of contact, the steady, creeping silence that replaced words. The walls of my world grew thicker, built from layers of dust, decay, and unspoken words. It was like I could grasp them physically like bricks and throw them with all my strength, sweat, and tears, but it simply never manifested. Each day blended into the next, a monotonous stream of gray, punctuated only by the occasional flicker of the television. The screen became my window, though the world it showed was distant, unreal. News broadcasts and daytime soaps offered glimpses of lives I no longer recognized. Each newscaster's voice, each melodramatic scene, was a reminder of a world I had lost access to. I watched, detached, my fingers grazing the crumbs and grime that accumulated in the folds of the couch. Years passed, and the light dimmed further. The isolation was a dense fog, and I wandered through it, disoriented and numb. My physical needs became secondary to my mental state. Hunger was a distant concept, thirst was an afterthought. The couch provided an insidious comfort, its embrace growing tighter as my own body withered away. My parents' visits became rarer, their faces blurring into one another. They were like ghosts, fading in and out of my reality. I began to imagine conversations that never happened, arguments that only existed in my mind. Some were recollections, but then I didn't really know anymore. The couch absorbed every inch of my mind, every mark and stain became me. Occasionally, there would be moments of clarity, fleeting instances when I was aware of the horror surrounding me. I would feel the cold grip of reality, like fingers tightening around my throat. The house would creak with unfamiliar sounds, and I would catch brief glimpses of sunlight seeping through the grime-covered windows. In those moments, I wanted to scream, to reach out, but the weight of my confinement held me down. Bugs had been the first to come, tiny, relentless invaders burrowed into my skin, leaving trails of bites that never healed. They thrived in the filth, their presence a constant torment as they crawled over and within me. I felt their legs, sharp and alien, scuttling across my skin, their bites in never-ending agony. My muscles atrophied, shrinking to mere shadows of their former strength. The pain was constant, a dull throb that echoed through my bones. I tried to move, but each attempt was met with searing pain, my body protesting the very thought of freedom. Pressure sores formed, deep and festering wounds that ate away at my flesh. The stench of rotting skin filled the air, a sickly sweet odor that clung to everything. Infection set in, spreading through my body like a dark plague. My skin became a mottled landscape of pus and decay, the sores growing deeper, exposing bone in some places. The pain was unbearable, a constant, knowing presence that consumed my every thought. I could feel the bacteria feasting on my flesh, their relentless hunger. The isolation was maddening. Sometimes the only sounds were the buzzing of flies, the scurrying of rodents, and my own labored breathing. I would think of the world outside. How come you abandoned me? How come I lived in you for 24 years, and you gave up on me? How come you didn't look for me? How come you saw the color of my eyes? You heard the rhythm of my breath. You felt my warmth in our shared company. You smelled and tasted the same air as me, and still, you killed me? Is she in here? The voice is stern, decisive. I can almost see the figure at the door, outlined by the light that spills in like liquid gold. It's a stark contrast to the dim haze I've grown accustomed to. The sudden intrusion is both terrifying and exhilarating. They come closer, their footsteps louder, more insistent. I want to move, to stand and face them, but my body is a cage, bound by years of inertia. I hear them talking, officers, medics, voices filled with disbelief and determination. Their words cut through the thick fog of my confinement. Hands, warm and strong, reach out, touching my shoulder. I flinch, but their touch is tender, reassuring. I look up and see faces full of concern, eyes wide with a mixture of horror and pity. The first thing I feel is the jarring shift from the oppressive embrace of the couch to the hard, unfamiliar touch of hands. They are rough but gentle, handling me with an almost reverent care. The light is blinding, searing through the filth-encrusted haze that has been my only reality for years. I try to shield my eyes, but the sudden brightness overwhelms me, forcing me to confront the world I had long forgotten. The hands belong to strangers, men and women in uniforms, their faces a blur of concern and professional detachment. I feel them lifting me, their movements awkward as they navigate the labyrinth of the couch's creases and folds, where my body has melded into the fabric. The weight of my own flesh feels foreign, each muscle screaming in protest as I am pulled into the cold, sterile air of the room. My skin, once a pale imitation of its former self, is now a canvas of sores and abrasions. The couch had been a breeding ground for infection, deep, festering wounds hidden beneath layers of grime. The texture of my skin is no longer smooth. It is a mottled landscape of red, raw patches interspersed with darker, necrotic areas. My hair is matted, a tangled mess of grease and debris that falls in clumps as they move me. Bugs, tiny and relentless, crawl over my skin, biting and burrowing into my flesh. I can feel their tiny legs scuttling over me as I am truly being taken care of for the first time, as they lift me out. I feel the sharp sting of the air against my exposed flesh. Every touch is a shock, each movement a jolt through my emaciated limbs. The paramedics try to speak to me. Their voices feel like angels stretching through another dimension, urging me to respond, to hold on. I cannot muster more than a ragged breath and a faint murmur. The journey to the hospital is a blur of harsh lights and sterile smells. I am wrapped in a blanket, the warmth of which is both comforting and strange. The ride is a dissonance of unfamiliar sounds, beeping monitors, muffled conversations, the hum of the engine. My body, unused to such stimuli, reacts with a series of involuntary tremors. In the emergency room, I am greeted by medical professionals. They examine me with deep-rooted care and shame floods me in excruciating waves. I want to fold my body together. Each touch, each probe, is accompanied by a careful explanation, though I am too disoriented to fully understand. The wounds are cleaned with meticulous attention. The process is painful, each swipe of antiseptic sending waves of agony through my sensitive skin. The physical treatment is only part of the recovery. I am introduced to a world of therapies: physical, occupational, psychological. Each session is a battle of my soul and physical limitations. The physical therapists work to restore the function of my limbs, guiding me through movements that feel both alien and excruciatingly familiar. The occupational therapists help me relearn basic skills, tasks that once seemed effortless. My sessions with therapists are agonizing and leave me feeling sore, delving into the dark recesses of my mind. They help me confront the psychological scars of isolation and neglect. A process fraught with emotional upheaval, for it left a giant mountain for me to dig through. The nightmares come frequently: vivid, unrelenting visions of the couch, of darkness and bugs, of the endless monotony. Each session forces me to confront these fears, that it is okay to get my hands and feet dirty in the process of deconstructing this mountain. It is the only way I will be able to see what is on the other side of it. My body, though freed from its physical prison, must contend with the long-term effects of immobility. My muscles need to be retrained, my skin healed, and every day is a struggle to reclaim a sense of normalcy. But I am surrounded by support. My path is burning bright, and this time, it is not in my skin but in the gorgeous skyline. Every evening, I anticipate the moment it explodes in warm, vibrant colors, hanging there briefly like nature's fireworks. At the same time, justice is served. It is not a balm for the wounds, merely an acknowledgement of the wrongs. The legal battles are intense, the exposure raw. They make me feel like a ghost, as if I am no one, simply a number or a case, a past event. Testimonies, evidence, and the media's unrelenting gaze are all part of the painful journey toward closure. My parents face prison time, but they cannot undo the years lost or fully compensate for the suffering endured. That was my life. They made sure my life was nothing. As I move forward, the healing is an ongoing process, a careful walk between succumbing to existence and choosing experience. Each day is a step toward reclaiming my life, my identity. I can't tell you who I truly am, because I could be a million people. The couch is gone, but its legacy remains in many ways I can't bear to think of for too long at a time, even as I actively decide to process it. So, I take my time. Who knows where I will be in 12 years from now? Note: this story is a tribute to the real-life victim of neglect and murder, Lacey Fletcher. Lacey Fletcher was tragically neglected and confined to a couch in her parents' home for over a decade. During this time, she suffered severe physical and emotional deterioration, including extensive pressure sores, infections, and extreme isolation. Despite the appalling conditions, her plight went unnoticed by the outside world until she was discovered in a state of profound neglect and sadly passed away. Her parents have received a sentence of 20 years in prison with a consecutive 20-year suspended sentence. My intention with this short story was to create a narrative that not only reflects the profound isolation and suffering she endured, but also honors her memory by exploring the emotional and psychological dimensions of such an experience, highlighting both the horrors and the resilience associated. I hope it resonates as a respectful homage to Lacey Fletcher's life and a reminder of the importance of addressing and preventing such tragedies. As the author, I chose to keep Lacey Fletcher alive in a what-if to underscore the profound injustice of her situation and to emphasize her enduring strength despite her unimaginable suffering. By allowing her character to survive, I aim to honor her resilience and highlight the potential for recovery and hope, something that was tragically denied in real life. May she rest in peace.
Now let's move to our next story. Story name: I was assigned to supervise a clinical trial. It went horribly wrong. I always advise those looking to do clinical trials for money to reconsider if they have other options. They don't pay well for what you have to go through, and the side effects can be killer. Usually, whatever we're testing gives patients a headache or mild nausea, but occasionally, it can get worse than that. Nothing I've ever seen in my few years of monitoring trials was ever as bad as what happened last week, though. It was beyond frustrating, and I knew it would eventually blow up in our faces. I didn't think that it would be something of this magnitude, though. It started last Monday. We were beginning the clinical trials of a new heart disease drug called Albucil. It was to be advertised as a breakthrough in the treatment of the disease, notably having noticeable effects on the body within just a few days. That's pretty fast for any drug to kick in, and I was admittedly curious to see if it would hold true. To my knowledge, it had only had one round of testing prior, and this was the first bout of human tests. The results of the rat tests were classified to us supervisors, which was standard procedure, so I didn't think anything of it at the time. It was quite a varied group of subjects. The ages ranged from 12 to 80, and the severity of cases ranged from early signs of the disease to people with not long left to live. Every single one of them was there with the same goal, though to advance treatment for the one burden they all share. It was a sentiment that I could get behind, and one that summarized why I chose to be a clinical trial supervisor. This specific trial would be a week long. We would provide patients with rooms to stay in and 3 meals a day. The other 2 supervisors would take the 8 am 4 p.m. and 4 p.m. 12 am shifts respectively, and I would have the overnight shift. I didn't want to work nights, but it was my turn to, and everyone else suffered through it before me, so fair is fair. The drug was expected to kick in on the 3rd day, meaning that we had to monitor the patient's improvement throughout the week. It sounds simpler than it is, and that's because I haven't taken patient behavior into account. In any given clinical trial at our company, patients sign a contract stating that they can't leave until the testing period is over, with clauses for medical evacuation and such. This isn't legal in the slightest, but it's how the higher ups say we should do it, and they hire plenty of security to make damn sure that it gets done. People don't like feeling entrapped, though, and patients often pick fights and get physical if they're told they can't leave. It's the toughest part of any trial, and for a drug that was apparently this monumental, we were expecting even worse behavior, especially if it proved to be a failure. The first night went pretty smoothly. I was treated with respect by most of the patients, and those that needed me for something never got snippy. As expected, we didn't see any negative signs, nor any change to the patient's vitals and conditions in general. The same went for the second day, although one odd thing did happen around 4 am. My call button went off, directing me to one of the rooms on the 2nd floor. The patient staying in that room was an older lady, mid-60s, with a more severe case of heart disease. She was a sweetheart though, and I was immediately concerned that something had happened, so I made my way upstairs. Upon entering her room, nothing looked out of the ordinary. Her bedside lamp was on, and she was sitting upright in the bed, looking at me. I walked to her side of the bed, and knelt down to be at eye level with her. "Miss Margaret, what's going on? Are you okay? Where are my fingers?" I was confused, to say the least. I looked down at her hands, and she seemed to have the usual amount of digits. I couldn't say that I'd seen this before, so I thought the best course of action would be to reassure her that she was okay. "That's always a good place to start. Miss Margaret, your fingers are right here. I can't see them. Can you make them come back?" I lifted her bony hand and counted her red-tipped fingers in front of her. She looked at me with wide eyes and smiled. "Oh, there they are. Thank you, dear." I was unsettled and immediately racked my brain to figure out what could be going on. Was she hallucinating? Quite possibly. I've seen it before, though not to the extent that one thinks that they're missing body parts. Could this be some sort of undiagnosed issue, completely unrelated to Albacil? Also possible. I decided that I'd consult with the other supervisors when I saw them again, and put it into my report. As long as she wasn't in any present danger, there was nothing I could do for her. I didn't start to panic until the next day. Throughout the night, I got 16 calls. There were 30 total patients under our watch, so over half of them were experiencing negative effects from the drug. That isn't the unsettling part, though what scared me was that every call was the same. I would walk into the room, and nothing would seem out of the ordinary, except the patient would be panicking. Toes, fingers, tongues, every patient claimed that something different was missing. Of course, nothing was actually gone, but it seemed that they'd actually lost all sensation in those areas. After the first 4 calls, I contacted the emergency doctor on duty, who was staying in a room in another wing of the facility. He was irritated that I was calling so early into my shift, but I frankly wasn't having it, and told him to zip it and come downstairs. Together, we examined all the patients, and came to the consensus that we would have to call an emergency meeting the next day. The doctor insisted that I should take the next night off, and get some rest after what I'd been dealing with, and he would advocate for the immediate end of the trial. I shouldn't have agreed. I received a call after the meeting, informing me that the trials would continue as they found no evidence that any of the patients were in any danger. At this point, I was just about done with not being listened to, and spoke up. "I can't do this anymore, Jim. These people are clearly in danger. They think they're losing limbs. And you don't see the danger in that? It's all in their heads. We're on the verge of releasing a breakthrough drug here. If these are the side effects, we can't do it. It goes against everything we're trying to do. We can't replace you on such short notice. You're going to stay, or I'm going to make sure you never work in this field again." This discussion is over. My phone clicked, and I was furious. I couldn't afford to be blacklisted from work, but I wasn't willing to watch people suffer to keep my job. I decided that I would return to work, but every time something bad happened, I would call the emergency doctor. If I couldn't stop the tests, I could at least keep a close eye on the patients. The next night was when everything finally collapsed. Every single person had some sort of problem. One man dragged himself through the hall with just his arms, screaming that his legs were missing. Another had to be restrained because he kept bashing his head into the concrete floor, claiming that his ears and eyes had vanished. The worst part, though, was the things that all of them said. They all claimed that something was coming to take them away, piece by piece. Something who'd been appearing in their sleep for days, taunting them as they laid there helplessly. I had to call the local police department and beg them to send officers over to the building to help me, struggling not to cry as I did so. What could this drug be doing to these people that they were having this violent of a reaction? It had to be the medication. It was the only common denominator. When the police arrived, they didn't help me. As I walked down the hall to open the door for them, everything behind the door suddenly went dark. I picked up the pace and tried pulling the door open, but it wouldn't budge. As I desperately knocked on it, shouting for a response, a calm but stern voice responded to me. It was the police chief, who informed me that the building had been ordered into quarantine. Hearing this, I backed up from the door, and barely heard another word that he said. Something was seriously wrong, as I already knew, but it was apparently to the scale that they didn't want anyone leaving. I was under strict orders to stay behind the desk and wait until medical professionals arrived. I was perfectly fine with that after all. I felt like I was gonna vomit, and I'd rather be close to a trash can. But it wasn't easy to stay put. The screaming coming from the rooms only got louder as I obsessively checked the clock. The pounding on the walls and doors was feverish, like someone was trying to escape a fire. But then it stopped. It all went quiet, and I looked up from my hands in shock, with tears streaming down my face. And that's when my call button went off. The call was coming from the outside buzzer, so I figured that the hazmat team was there. I answered it, and waited to hear someone talk. "Hello?" There was nothing but the sound of breathing. "Hello? I've arrived." The sentence itself wasn't inherently creepy, but I still felt sick. It wasn't the voice of the police chief, or of someone that I recognized at all. I cleared my throat, and responded in an admittedly shaky voice. Who is this? I am going to enter. After hearing that, I clicked the receiver off. As I weakly stood back up from the desk, I thought about what the voice had said. As I pondered, I saw the outside door creak open in my peripheral vision. The sound of flesh slapping against the floor echoed through the hall as all other noise faded from my mind. It wasn't a man in a hazmat suit, nor a cop, nor a doctor, nor anything I've ever seen before. Slowly crawling towards me was something so utterly vile that being blind would have been preferable to seeing it. It traveled on four of what can most closely be described as legs, that hung loose with gangrenous skin and trembled every time they hit the floor. Its head dragged along the floor, as if its neck was snapped long ago and had healed in that position. Its piercing eyes stared at me, one a soothing blue and the other a striking brown. Its figure looked like body parts that had been hastily stitched together in hopes that they'd resemble something living. As it drew breath, it grumbled, in an almost human-like way. I struggled to process what was happening and slowly took a step backwards, towards the front desk. I sat there and stared at it as it moved towards me. The building was sealed, and there was no way out. But before it could reach me, it stopped and spoke in the same voice I'd heard over the intercom. You are afraid? Yes. Fear not. I am not here for you. I pressed my back against the desk, looking at the creature through my knees. I opened my mouth to scream, but nothing came out. It raised a red-tipped finger and pointed at me. We will meet again. Yes, I know it. For you, there are still many things to see. I closed my eyes as tears welled up in them. I could tell the lights turned off, whether solely above me or in the facility as a whole. As the hushed humming suddenly stopped, I opened my eyes and prepared to be faced with horror. They found me passed out on the floor inside of the office. My condition wasn't the horrifying part, unfortunately. In each of the patient's rooms, all that remained was a corpse. One body was missing his legs. Another lacked eyes and a tongue. Miss Margaret was missing her fingers. I've been locked in my cell for a day now. They're saying that I did it. They say that I killed them all, and there was no monster. But worst of all is that fact that the company is testifying against me, saying that I went crazy while working and snapped under the pressure. They said that it had to be me because there's no way any of the patients in the placebo group would be hallucinating.